On the morning of Thanksgiving Day, my phone showed 41 missed calls before I even finished my first cup of coffee. I didn't rush to call anyone back. I just stood at the kitchen window of my little rented cottage, watching the sun come up over the lake, and I counted them. 41 calls, 14 texts from my son, Gerald, 9 from my daughter, Patrice, 11 from my ex-wife, Donna, 7 from various combinations of in-laws, grandchildren, and people I hadn't spoken to in months. I read none of the messages. I just set the phone face down on the counter and went back to watching the water. The strange part wasn't that they were calling. The strange part was that I had known, almost to the minute, exactly when those calls would start. Have you ever given everything you had to a family that treated your generosity like a utility bill? Have you ever sat at a table you paid for, surrounded by people you loved, and felt completely invisible? For 17 Thanksgivings in a row, I was the man behind the curtain, the one who booked the venues, settled the deposits, signed the checks, and then got blamed when the napkins were the wrong color. This Thanksgiving, I did something I had never done before. I simply stopped, and by 10 o'clock in the morning, every phone in a 3-state radius was lighting up with my name. But before I tell you what happened when they finally arrived at that restaurant, let me ask you something, friends. Has anyone in your life ever confused your kindness for a job description? Leave a comment below, because what I'm about to share started long before Thanksgiving morning, and it started with a decision I should have made years ago. My name is Roy. I'm 63 years old, and I have spent the better part of 2 decades being the most reliable, most taken-for-granted man in my family's life. Donna and I divorced when our kids were teenagers. Gerald was 16, Patrice was 13. The split was civil enough, as divorces go. No courtroom battles, no ugly public scenes. We agreed on the important things and went our separate ways. What I didn't anticipate was that going our separate ways didn't mean going separate ways on holidays. It meant I would continue to organize, fund, and manage every major family gathering, while Donna continued to have opinions about how I did it. The first Thanksgiving after the divorce, I rented a private dining room at a steakhouse downtown. I invited everyone: Donna, both kids, Donna's sister and her husband, my mother before she passed. 12 people total. I paid for all of it. Nobody offered to split anything. Nobody asked what it cost. But they smiled, and they toasted, and for a few hours it felt like family still meant something. So I did it again the following year, and the year after that. By the 5th or 6th year, I had stopped thinking of it as a choice and started thinking of it as a responsibility. By the 10th year, the family had stopped thinking of it as generosity and started thinking of it as their right. The gatherings grew. The expectations grew faster. What started as a restaurant dinner became a private event space. What started as a catered buffet became a sit-down dinner with a hired chef. Gerald started bringing his girlfriend, then his wife, then their 2 kids. Patrice brought her boyfriend, then her fiancé, then eventually just herself after that relationship ended. But she brought her appetite for expensive wine. Donna brought whoever she was seeing at the time, and those guests brought their own particular opinions about table settings and parking and whether the music was too loud. I tried to keep up. More than that, I tried to excel. Every year I pushed a little harder, spent a little more, upgraded a little further. Not because anyone thanked me, because I kept hoping that one year, just one, the gathering would end without someone finding a reason to be disappointed in me. That year never came. The first time I tried to say something, Gerald was 28 years old. I had just received the invoice for that year's venue, a converted warehouse space in the arts district that Donna had selected because it had exposed brick and Edison bulbs. The bill was nearly $6,000 before catering. I called Gerald and mentioned, carefully, that the costs had gotten out of hand. He listened for about 45 seconds. Then he said, "Dad, you always do this. You complain about money and then everything turns out fine. Just let Mom handle the details." He said, "Let Mom handle the details," as though Donna were managing anything other than her guest list and her expectations. I let it go. I paid the invoice. The party was lovely, apparently. Someone spilled red wine on the tablecloth, and somehow that became a story about how I had chosen the wrong rental company. The year I turned 60, I started keeping notes. Nothing dramatic, just a small notebook where I wrote down what each Thanksgiving cost me. Not just in dollars, but in the other ways you pay for things. The headaches. The weeks of coordination. The day of phone calls when some detail had gone sideways. The moment, every single year, without fail, when someone pulled me aside to tell me what I should have done differently. By that point, my annual Thanksgiving expenses had crossed $9,000. $9,000 for a holiday I dreaded. From October onward. What stopped me from quitting sooner wasn't the money, friends. I want to be clear about that. I've worked hard my whole life, and I've done all right. It wasn't the money. It was something harder to explain. It was the belief that if I stopped, something would break. Some thread that was still holding this family together would finally snap. Gerald and Patrice were grown adults with their own lives. Donna was her own person. But Thanksgiving felt like the one day a year we all still existed in the same story. I was afraid of what happened if I stopped writing it, so I kept writing it. And they kept rewriting my ending. Last Thanksgiving was the one that finally broke something in me. Not something bad, something necessary. I had found a beautiful venue, a renovated farmhouse about 40 minutes outside the city, private property, fully catered, room for 22 guests, which was how many people the family had accumulated by that point. I put down a deposit in September. I confirmed the catering company in October. I arranged transportation for 3 of the older relatives who couldn't drive long distances. I created a group chat with the logistics. I did everything I had always done. Then Gerald's wife, Tammy, decided the farmhouse was too rustic. She sent me a link to a boutique hotel in the city with a private dining room and a chef's tasting menu. She didn't frame it as a suggestion. She framed it as a correction. Roy, I really think this would work better for the kids. There were no small children at our Thanksgiving who required a boutique hotel in the city. There were 2 grandchildren, aged 9 and 11, who were perfectly happy anywhere with a television and a breadbasket. I explained that I had already paid a non-refundable deposit on the farmhouse. Tammy said she understood, but that she just thought I should know that some people were uncomfortable with the drive. I asked which people. She couldn't name any specific people. The uncomfortable people remained anonymous. I kept the farmhouse. The gathering happened. For the first 3 hours, it was genuinely pleasant. The food was exceptional. The property was beautiful. A light rain had started falling, and the kids were running around on the covered porch, and everything looked like something off a postcard. Then dessert arrived. I had ordered a custom pie from a bakery, a family recipe I had tracked down years ago that my mother used to make. Pecan pie with a specific type of brown sugar filling. I had driven 40 minutes out of my way to pick it up that morning. Donna tasted it, set down her fork, and said, loudly enough for the table to hear, "This isn't how it's supposed to taste." The table went quiet. Gerald looked at his plate. Patrice looked out the window. I said, "It's Mom's recipe, Donna. The bakery worked from her original card." She shook her head. "Your mother always added something else. This is just off." And that was it. That was the whole conversation. But somehow it cast a shadow over the rest of the evening. People ate politely. Conversations stayed shallow. When guests started leaving, the goodbyes were quick. Nobody said the pie was wonderful. Nobody said thank you for the farmhouse, or the catering, or the transportation arrangements, or the 9 weeks of planning I had invested in that single afternoon. As I drove home alone that night, I did the math for the first time in a while. 17 years, conservative estimate. Somewhere between $80,000 and $100,000 spent on holidays this family had collectively decided were my responsibility. Not our responsibility. Mine. I sat in my driveway for a while after I pulled in. My dog, a 12-year-old beagle named Hank, was watching me from the front window the way old dogs do, with the kind of calm, uncomplicated loyalty that makes you realize how complicated everything else has become. I went inside. Hank put his head in my lap, and I made a decision. Next year, they could figure it out themselves. Now, friends, before I tell you what happened in October when the planning messages started arriving, I want to ask you something. If you had been in that driveway, after 17 years and everything I just described, would you have made the same decision? Or would you have talked yourself out of it? Tell me honestly in the comments. Because what happened next was the part I hadn't fully prepared myself for. Not the planning, not the logistics, the silence. October came the way it always did, with a flurry of messages in the family group chat. Gerald kicked things off with a restaurant suggestion, a new American place downtown with a prix-fixe holiday menu. Tammy immediately responded that she'd heard good things. Donna sent a thumbs-up emoji. Patrice asked about parking. 3 separate conversations launched simultaneously about what time people would arrive, whether Donna's neighbor Sheila was invited again, and whether the restaurant could accommodate Gerald's younger kid's peanut allergy. Not one message was addressed to me. Not one message asked whether I had made a reservation. Not one person sent a direct text saying, "Roy, are you handling this?" They didn't ask because they had never needed to ask. For 17 years, the asking had been unnecessary. I was always already handling it. This time, I read every message and responded to none of them. I watched the thread fill up over the following 2 weeks. 47 messages about a Thanksgiving dinner that nobody had bothered to actually book. I checked the restaurant's website. Their holiday reservation system required a deposit, a substantial one, for a private dining room that fit our group size. I noted the deadline. I did not submit a payment. November arrived. The messages in the group chat slowed down, the way they always do when people assume the boring logistical work is being handled by someone else. I received one text from Donna, asking if I had taken care of the reservation. I read the message. I thought about it for a long time. I did not respond. The weeks between that text and Thanksgiving were the strangest of my life. Not painful, strange. I went to work. I came home. Hank and I took our evening walks. I called my friend Marcus in Portland a few times, just to talk. I booked a small lakeside cottage 2 states away for the Thanksgiving week. A place I had always wanted to visit. A small town in the Finger Lakes region of New York, where I used to fish with my father as a boy. 1 bedroom. A small dock. Views of the water. I didn't tell anyone I was going. Not because I was hiding, because nobody asked. That part stayed with me. Through all of October and November, with all those messages flying around in that group chat, the restaurant suggestions, the parking debates, the dietary requests, not one person sent a direct message asking if I was doing all right. Not Gerald. Not Patrice. Definitely not Donna. They asked if the reservation was handled. They didn't ask about me. I drove to the Finger Lakes the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. Hank rode in the back seat with his nose out the window the whole way. We stopped once for gas and once for a sandwich. I had downloaded 3 audiobooks I'd been meaning to get to for 2 years. I arrived at the cottage as the sun was setting over the water, unloaded my bag, settled Hank in front of the small wood stove, and made myself a simple dinner. I slept better that night than I had in months. Thanksgiving morning was cold and clear. I took Hank down to the dock early. The lake was still, the kind of quiet that feels earned, and I drank my coffee standing there watching a pair of geese move slowly across the far shore. For a long stretch of time, I had absolutely nothing to manage. Back at the cottage, I made a real breakfast: eggs, toast, the good coffee I had brought from home. I called my old friend Carl in Columbus, who lost his wife 2 years ago and usually spends holidays alone. We talked for almost an hour. I hadn't done that in years, just talked to a friend on a holiday morning with nowhere to be and no invoice to worry about. Hank snored by the wood stove. The geese came back. I knew, the way you know when you've set something in motion, that the morning in that restaurant dining room was going to look very different from mine. I had checked the restaurant's website one more time the week before I left. Their system showed the private dining room was still available for Thanksgiving, no reservation under our family name, no deposit on file, availability still showing as open. I closed the browser. I didn't make a reservation. I drove to New York. By 9 in the morning, my phone had started vibrating. I didn't look at it for a while. I finished my breakfast. I washed my plate. I sat back down with my second cup of coffee, and Hank moved from the wood stove to put his head on my knee, the way he does when he knows something is happening. I picked up the phone. Gerald had called 11 times. Tammy had called 4 times and sent 6 texts. Donna had called 9 times. Patrice had called 7 times and left 2 voicemails. There were 4 calls from numbers I didn't immediately recognize. I assumed relatives who had driven to the restaurant and found themselves standing in a lobby with no reservation confirmed and no private dining room waiting for them. The texts told the story in real time. Gerald first. Dad, call me. Then, 15 minutes later. Dad, what's going on? Then, we're at the restaurant. They don't have us. Where are you? Donna's texts were shorter and sharper. Patrice's were the ones that surprised me. Her last message didn't sound angry. It sounded scared. Dad, nobody can reach you. Are you okay? Please, just tell us you're okay. I sat with that one for a minute. Then I called Patrice back. She picked up before the first ring finished. Dad. The relief in her voice was immediate and genuine. Where are you? We didn't know what to think. I'm upstate, I said. I'm fine. Hank and I rented a place for the week. A pause. You what? I rented a cottage. I've been here since Tuesday. Another pause, longer. Did you make the reservation at the restaurant? No, I said. I didn't. The silence that followed was different from the ones I was used to. This wasn't the silence of someone searching for a complaint. This was the silence of someone genuinely recalibrating. Patrice said quietly, Dad, why didn't you tell us? And I said the thing I should have said years ago, the one sentence that had been sitting in my chest for nearly 2 decades. Honey, why didn't any of you ask? She didn't have an answer right away. I could hear noise behind her voices, movement, Gerald saying something in the background. I said, put your brother on. Gerald came on the line wound tight. Dad, there are 14 people standing in a lobby right now. Tammy's mother drove 2 hours. The kids are hungry. The restaurant says they have nothing on file. What happened? I said calmly. Gerald, did you book the reservation? That's not you always. Did you book it? A long pause. No. Did anyone book it? Another pause. I don't think so. That's the answer, son. He started to argue and I let him go for a moment. He said I had created a situation. He said it was irresponsible. He said people had made plans. I let all of it land without interrupting. Then I said, Gerald, I have created the situation every year for 17 years. This is the first year I didn't, and I want you to sit with the difference between those 2 things. He went quiet. I could hear him breathing. I said, there are good restaurants in that neighborhood that don't require reservations on Thanksgiving. There are grocery stores. There are options. Figure one out. You're a capable adult. So is your sister. So, I imagine, is Tammy's mother. He said some things after that. None of them were kind. I let those land too, and I told him I loved him, and I told him I hoped they found somewhere warm and good to eat, and then I said goodbye. Donna called while I was still holding the phone. I answered because I had decided to answer everyone exactly once. She didn't start with hello. She started with, Roy, what did you do? I said, I took Thanksgiving off. She said that wasn't funny. I said I wasn't joking. She said I had humiliated the family. I asked who exactly had been humiliated, since as far as I could tell, the only person who had ever done anything to be embarrassed about was me picking up check after check for people who couldn't be bothered to wonder whether I wanted to be there at all. That one landed differently. I heard it in her silence. I said, Donna, in 17 years of Thanksgiving dinners, did you ever once ask me how I was doing? She didn't answer. I said, I'm not asking to be unkind. I'm asking because I genuinely want to know. She said, after a long moment, I assumed you were fine. I know you did, I said. And I meant it without bitterness, because that was the truest thing either of us had said to each other in years. She had assumed I was fine the same way. You assume the electricity is fine. You don't think about it until the lights go out. I said I hoped she had a good day. Then I ended the call. I put the phone on the table. Hank looked up at me. Outside, the lake had gone glassy in the mid-morning calm. A family down the shore was setting up a folding table on their dock, laughing about something, bundled in coats. I watched them for a while. Then I made myself another cup of coffee and started one of the audiobooks I had been meaning to get to. The calls slowed down by noon. By 2 in the afternoon, A few texts had arrived that were different in tone from the morning ones. Patrice sent one that said simply, "I'm sorry, Dad. I should have been paying more attention. I read it 3 times." I wrote back, "Thank you, sweetheart. That means more than you know." Gerald didn't text that day. That was all right. Gerald had never been quick about things that required him to be uncomfortable. Thanksgiving dinner that evening was a bowl of soup I made from scratch, good bread from a bakery in the nearest town, and a piece of the pecan pie I had picked up the day before, a different bakery, a different recipe, one that I chose entirely for myself. Hank got a small piece of turkey from the deli section of the grocery store. He ate it like it was the best thing he'd ever tasted. It was easily the best Thanksgiving I had in 20 years. The weeks after the holiday were not entirely smooth. I won't tell you they were. Gerald was distant in the way that people are when they're embarrassed but not yet ready to admit it. He texted about practical things, a question about a family financial matter, a quick note about his son's school play. Nothing about Thanksgiving. Donna sent a single email, formal in tone, asking if I planned to maintain my position going forward. I wrote back that I hadn't taken a position. I had taken a break. And I intended to keep taking that break until the people I loved were ready to have a real conversation about what our family had become. Patrice called me the week after Thanksgiving just to talk. No agenda. She asked about the cottage, about Hank, about what I had done with myself all week. She told me about a difficult year she'd been having at work, something she had never mentioned during any of our group chat Thanksgivings, where everything stayed surface level and pleasant. We talked for an hour and a half. It was the best conversation I'd had with my daughter in years. That conversation told me what I needed to know about what the holiday dinners had really cost us. Not the money. The money I could account for. What those dinners had cost us was the real ones. The honest conversations. The moments where someone might have said, "How are you?" and actually waited for an answer. We had traded all of that for catered appetijoses and rented Edison bulbs and arguments about whether the pie tasted right. The following October, no group chat came back to life with restaurant suggestions. Gerald and Patrice talked to each other directly and made a plan. They booked a restaurant. They paid for it. They invited me, plainly and without assumption, and asked if I wanted to come. I did. I brought a bottle of wine and showed up on time, and nobody asked me to manage a single thing. Tammy told me the place had been Gerald's idea. Gerald looked like he wanted to say something and then didn't. That was enough. I'm not telling you the family became something out of a movie. It didn't. Some of the closeness I had tried so hard to manufacture was never there to begin with, and no amount of catered dinners was ever going to put it there. What changed was something smaller and more real. When my children called after that, they were calling to talk to me, not to confirm a deposit, not to ask if the venue had parking, to talk to their father. There are people in your life, friends, who mistake your consistency for their convenience, who have learned, slowly and without malice, to treat the best of you like a service they've subscribed to. I am not asking you to walk away from the people you love. I am asking you to consider what it's costing you to keep showing up in a way that makes you invisible. The best Thanksgiving of my life was a bowl of soup, a sleeping beagle, and a lake I had been meaning to visit since I was a boy. Nobody complained about a single thing. Nobody needed me to fix anything. The geese came back in the evening and landed on the water without making a sound, and I sat on the dock in the cold until I couldn't feel my fingers, and I thought about my father, who used to bring me to places like this when I was young and never once made me feel like a burden. I thought about how long it had taken me to give myself the same gift. If this story reached something in you today, friends, I'd love to know. Leave a comment and tell me, has someone in your life ever mistaken your generosity for a guarantee? And if you've found your way back to yourself the way I found mine, tell me that too, because sometimes the most important thing isn't the story I'm telling. It's knowing you're not alone in yours.